Welcome to Comic Sans, folks, the podcast about comics for those who are sans knowledge. I'm Yan, the comics half of this podcast.
And I'm Nat, the sans half of this podcast. And today I'm wearing sweatpants, Yan.
Why would you need sweatpants, Nat?
Well, it's pretty cold right now where we
interesting.
are.
A little tidbit. You know, if you're trying to geolocate Comic Sans, we're going to give you the goods. Usually we record in Singapore or online, but today fate has brought us together into the Big Apple, the city that never sleeps. That's right, we are in Hanoi. No. We are in New York City, the home of Daredevil, Matthew Murdock, bombarded with sound and noise. And so you may hear a little bit of drips of garbage trucks.
Sirens.
People screaming.
But you know, that's part of the charm of this city.
You know, sirens are debatable. But yes, we are in New York. And so we ask you to please pardon us for any spillage of noise.
It's part of the auditory experience. You know, we're really taking Comic Sans international.
You know, Nat, I'm going to ask you something. This is a new edition, new question.
Sure.
What's
We're starting with a question today.
Yeah. What's something you've been enjoying lately? Can you tell me what's a piece of media that you've been reading or watching?
That I've been enjoying. Well, you're really putting me on the spot here. Well, on the plane to New York, I watched The Holdovers. That was great. I really, really enjoyed that. Recommended by you.
Yes, that is
Thank
correct.
you for that.
Yes.
I did want to watch Oppenheimer, but you very strongly dissuaded me.
It'd be a huge mistake to watch Oppenheimer on a plane. Can you imagine the
And to clarify, not because he thinks it's a bad movie.
No, I love Oppenheimer.
Because he thinks it's a movie that is not worthy to be watched on a plane TV.
Well, also, I feel like on a plane, sometimes your brain gets a little discombobulated. And so if you saw the bomb go off on the plane and then you went to sleep, I think you'd be like, oh, no.
True. So, but yes, I watched The Holdovers and I really enjoyed it. Why do you ask?
No, I'm just trying to get a conversation going.
Oh, well.
Why don't you ask me back?
Sure. Yen, what have you been enjoying?
I've been enjoying Dr. Stone.
Is that what we're reading today?
No, we're not reading Dr. Stone today.
What is the point of this bit?
Well, just to talk, just to open up the conversation.
The people aren't here to see us talk.
I've been reading Dr. Stone, a manga I've been really enjoying. I just wanted to share that with people. And I just thought, we could share every episode. We could talk about what we're reading or what we're watching. But apparently that's too controversial for you, Nat. So let's get right down to business. Okay.
I missed the business.
You
what
are
can
not
I
Mr.
say?
Business. You are not Mr. Business. Do not claim that title. Nat, do you remember what we read last episode?
Last episode, we read Gideon Falls.
And what was notable about Gideon Falls?
It was horror.
Yes.
A genre that I am famously not a fan of, but somehow, some way, the comic kind of made me appreciate and enjoy the genre, which was a really big surprise. If you missed that, go back an episode, listen to that. It's a whole experience.
And today, Nat, we're going into a different genre.
Ooh.
Can you think of another genre we haven't gone into?
Something that we've not touched at all.
Something we've not touched before. Elements of it have been present, but it's new. It's new as itself.
Erotica.
It's astoundingly close, but not correct. Not correct. That does apply to what we're reading. Keep your socks on. Stay calm.
I'm not wearing any socks.
Oh, no. Get some socks and keep them on. It is, that's part of the discussion we're going to have, but it's not erotica. That's not the genre I'm looking for.
Okay, but something erotica adjacent.
No.
Oh, no? Okay. Well, let's go somewhere else then. Western.
No. More basic.
More basic?
Yeah. I think Aristotle said every piece of work is one of these two things. It's either a tragedy or a...
comedy.
We are reading a comedy. Good job, Nat.
Have we not touched comedies?
No, we haven't. We've had comic elements.
Right.
Hey, wait, what was that? Comic elements? Whoa, hold on. Hold on a second.
Hey guys, give me a second. I'm leaving this podcast. He's going to just host it on his own. Oh yeah, I guess no straight up comedy. We've done like Tintin, which was funny in its own cute little way.
You know, I think Laura Olympus had some jokes.
Sure,
yeah. Hellboy definitely had jokes.
Oh yeah, I mean Pancakes was pretty
Pancakes is pretty funny, but we're reading something that is a comedy today. And that's tough. Because if I tell you something is funny, you're primed to be like, oh, I'm not going to find it funny.
Right.
You know, like if I say I'm going to tell you a really funny joke, you're instantly going to be like, I'm not.
Are you?
Later.
Oh. Stick around, folks.
So, as we did with the horror, let's think about what are some elements of comedy, Nat? What are some elements?
Elements of comedy. Jokes.
Okay. Man.
Laughing.
Man, no, that's not an element of comedy. No, something in the work. Oh my.
What are you looking for? Slapstick?
Okay, how about, like punchlines?
Oh, sure. Punchlines.
Okay. Anything else? Am I just going to have to read my list?
You know, I think you just give it to me.
Okay. Puns, setups, wordplay, references.
Oh.
Okay. And maybe the most important thing, going back to Aristotle.
Sure.
Have you heard this saying before? Comedy equals tragedy plus...
Bananas?
Man, this sucks. Time. That's the saying. Comedy is tragedy plus time. You wait long enough and it becomes funny. Okay, so what I'm trying to get at is timing.
Comedic timing.
So much of comedy is in the timing of it, right?
Yes,
so that's why sometimes you re-listen to a joke and you'll still find it funny even if you've watched that stand-up before because their timing is so good.
Yes.
Right? It's not just the information they're presenting, it's how they're presenting it.
Yes.
Let me. Ooh, it's time for my joke, Nat.
Oh, so soon.
Yeah, so soon. You thought I'd be holding it for later. Nope.
We really deliver on our promises and we deliver quickly.
Ready for this?
I'm ready.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Interrupting cow. Do you know how knock, knock jokes work?
But see, if I don't answer, I don't give you the chance to interrupt
Then
me.
we sit here in silence for the rest of the episode and everyone suffers.
Interrupting cow.
Shit. See, I flopped the timing. Well, actually, Nat ruined the timing, making the whole thing unfunny.
That was
Do
a
you
negative.
see how important timing
That
is
was
to
a
comedy?
negative example of how timing can be done wrong. And now I'm gonna do it in the right way. Are you ready?
Okay. Okay, put your shirt back on. Okay, hold on. Put your shirt back on.
Okay. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Saddam.
Saddam who?
It's a damn cold night.
I don't even know that song. That did not land for me slightly.
See what happens there is you think I'm gonna say Saddam Hussein.
That is what I thought you were gonna say.
But then I flip it on you and I sing Avril Lavigne.
Let's fucking move on. I'm not supposed to swear, but I can't hold it back. Okay, let's talk about the freaking comics, man.
Yeah.
I'm wasting enough time on this bull. Can I say bull?
You can say cow.
Nat,
Interrupting.
you ready?
cow.
You ready? You can't set it up for yourself. You can't do it to yourself. We're reading a book today, Nat, called, okay, put your socks on and keep them on.
Yeah.
Sex Criminals.
Ooh.
By Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky.
I like the first part, but the second part not so much, especially when they're combined.
Oh, it's not, okay. No, it's not going to be sex crimes.
Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God.
We're actually reading an adaptation of Law and Order SVUs.
Why are you looking at me as if that was like a out of this world assumption? This book is called Sex Criminals.
I'm moving on.
Sex crimes is right there.
I think that's just where your mind goes, and I think that's something that you need to dwell on with a professional and not with me.
You're right.
Fun fact, Sex Criminals, the same year as This One Summer, was also on the top 10 most requested banned books in libraries in the USA.
Wow.
So-
we're really on a roll here. We're really checking through that list.
Can you imagine if the rest of this podcast is just us going through that list?
But only from that year.
But only from that year, dude. I think it's 2016.
But if you're wondering, This One Summer is a book that we read 2 episodes ago. Feel free to check that out.
So, Sex Criminals was also banned from the Apple platform.
Oh.
So, because you used to be able to, I mean, I don't know if you still can. I don't have
Yeah.
an Apple, but you could buy comics on phones and then just read it.
Oh, that's new to me.
I don't know if that's still the case, but Apple didn't allow Sex Criminals onto their platform.
Did they allow This One Summer?
They did.
Oh.
They said Sex Criminals was pornographic.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So, keep those socks on.
Thank goodness I'm wearing sweatpants.
I'm just so depressed. So, Apple called it pornographic.
Mm-hmm.
But according to its writer and artist, Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky, Sex Criminals is the, quote, unsexiest book about sex you'll ever read.
Interesting.
Interesting. Hmm?
That's a big claim because, science textbooks exist.
That's true.
And those are pretty unsexy.
Those are pretty sex. Oh, sorry. Okay, opposite ways on that. Opposite ways. Let me tell you a little bit more about Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky. Okay, Matt Fraction is one of the comic book writers that got me excited about the medium. So he's a very formative writer for me.
Mm-hmm.
His book Casanova by Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon is one of my all-time favorites, even though very often in that book I didn't know what was going on. Chip Zdarsky, the other half of Sex Criminals, he's writing Batman and he was writing Daredevil, but back then he was known for much goofier work. Okay, so he was writing his own comic called Prison Funnies. He was the writer on Howard the Duck for Marvel
Sounds
Comics.
very familiar.
Howard the Duck is a Marvel character he's a duck. Okay?
I wouldn't have guessed.
and also Sex Criminals. And Sex Criminals came from this impulse from Matt Fraction to do a, quote, proper sex comedy, end quote, in the comic book form. Okay, let me read you this quote from Matt Fraction. It's a genre I love in other media that tends to be underrepresented in comics. We wanted it to be legitimately funny rather than a genre work with funny lines in it. So we were just talking about this, right?
Right.
Hellboy has funny lines in it. Lore Olympus has funny lines in it, but they're not necessarily there primarily for comedy.
And I'd say Saga, which was our season 1, episode 1 comic,
Yes.
has both comedy and sex in it, but would not be classified as a sex comedy.
True. And so Zdarsky said this. It's tricky in comics because there aren't a lot of deliberate comedies, you know? It tends to be a kind of comic that doesn't really get done. Okay? And so you see what they're talking about. It's not necessarily dialogue that's funny. It's comics that are funny.
Right.
So a comic can have jokes, as we know, right? And they can have a funny sentence in them. But that's not the full tool bag of a comic book, right? They've got so many other things that we discussed. Panels, gutters, right? You know, in a comic book, can't control timing in the same way a film can, right? Going back to timing, right? And with Gideon Falls, we know Gideon Falls doesn't have the ability to do a jump scare in the same way a movie can, but it still can do jump scares.
Through the page turn.
Right? So the comic book has the panel, the speech bubble, the page turn to surprise you with its punchlines.
Right.
I don't want to go into too much detail because I just want you to read the book.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you about this. Okay? At the back of every issue of Sex Criminals, every issue, there's a sprawling message. You're going to see it in a bit that says, for mature readers, duh.
Well, I guess I can't read it then.
Yeah, you can.
Damn.
But I think it's really important to think about that, right? Because it's not, Sex Criminals is setting itself up as not something that's going to educate you.
Right.
Matt Fraction, quote, it's not a book that should answer children's questions about sex.
It's not this one summer.
It's not this one summer. It is a book for adults, right? But that doesn't mean it's all jokes. Zdarsky talked about receiving the first script pages from Matt Fraction and being surprised by how much emotion there was in it. And Zdarsky said this, quote, I'm going to have to learn how to draw people emoting, close quote. Which is funny considering how his career has moved and he's ended up doing a lot more serious work. Like any of the best sex comedies, right? It's not just about the comedy itself. It's also about emotional resonance. It's the kind of sex comedy that's digging into the oddness of sex in modern society and then laughs at it and gets us to laugh at it too.
Right.
It's not for kids, but it's for the kid inside us that was confused and lost and didn't understand anything. Matt Fraction said this, quote, the thing I hear all the time, the thing I'm most gratified to hear that I have heard with frequency is, I thought I was the only one, or I thought I was alone, end quote. And that's what Sex Criminals does. Today, we're going to be reading Sex Criminals 1, 2, and a little bit of 3.
1, 2, and a little bit of 3. What? I just said what you said.
Yeah, I know, but you did it with a little tune. You did it with a little jingle.
1, 2, and a little bit of 3.
You did it with a little kick in your step.
1, 2, and a little bit of 3.
Fun fact. Another fun fact about Sex Criminals.
Sure.
It ended at 31 issues, but they numbered the last issue 69.
Nice.
Because nobody could stop them.
So, really, for the mature reader, but not for the mature writer.
No. And so, once again, Nat, you are going to be reading my floppies. These are my original copies.
Don't say that word. I'm talking about Sex Criminals.
So what you want me to say? My Hardies? Is that what you want?
Your chubbies.
My chub. Man, this episode really stinks,
I
man.
mean, you picked this.
This episode stinks. I made a huge
you knew
mistake.
what was coming.
Okay, wait,
you
let's get
knew
some.
what was coming.
Let's see.
And
if we
it's
can get
not
some.
just the people in the comic.
I'm so depressed. Okay, so we're reading issues 1, 2, and a little bit of 3. I'm going to tell Nat which part of 3. I'm going to flip to it for him, and I'll tell you readers later what that is.
Okay. Oh, it's like a little surprise.
It's a little surprise.
But then how would they read it before the recap?
That's a great point. That's a problem for them to figure out.
But let's be real. Who really... let's be honest for a moment.
Yeah,
Dear listener, if anyone actually pauses the episode, goes and gets it and reads it, email us at comicsense@andasproductions.com .com.
What are you saying? .gi.garp?
You said .org and I thought of orgy.
Oh, okay. This is terrible, man. I shouldn't have opened this.
andasproductions.com, and I will personally send you a picture of Yen to thank you. Because I don't think anyone does. So,
I don't consent to this.
So I
don't consent to this.
So I feel like it's fine. We'll say which part of issue 3 we read after the break.
Yes. And so, Nat, here are my chubbies.
Thank you.
Take it away.
Squish, squish.
Welcome back, listener. Welcome back, Nat. Nat proudly came back into the room with the comics. Instead, he was in
Cum World.
So same as always, Nat. I made you read a lot of comic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Could you recap what you read in 5 words? And I don't want you to recap what happens. I just want you to recap sort of the feeling / the concept,
Sure.
some of the themes that are involved in what you just read.
Sure. Orgasm.
Okay, 1.
Connection.
Okay,
And together, like affinity, connection, you know?
sure.
I think also like self-discovery.
Self-discovery.
4th word I'm going to give you is crime.
Okay, crime. Okay.
Really, really giving you something out of the box there.
Yep.
And the final word that I'm going to give you is funny.
Funny. Okay, folks. I think we're cooking.
We're cooking.
I think we're cooking.
I think
from now on, I'm going to say from now on, I'll let it slide this time. But from now on, for the 5 words, you are not allowed to use a word that is in the title.
Okay, technically crime and criminals are different words.
No, not related to the title. You can't do it from now on.
Fine. Okay, you know, I'll replace that word. Heist.
Great. Thank
There
you.
we go.
Now that's
There we
specific.
go.
That's interesting.
There we go.
That's value added.
Thank you.
What were you going to say?
I'm a podcast host. I was going to say Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky were cooking.
They were cooking.
They were cooking.
Okay. Now let's recap a little more broadly what Sex Criminals is.
Well, you know, I realize it's a really easy way to do this. Pass me the second issue.
Okay. Oh, are you going to read the previously on? Yeah. The previously on is a riot. I love it.
So for the listener, so I read the entirety of issue 1, issue 2, and we're still not revealing what I read in issue 3?
We'll get there when we get there in the discussion.
Okay. So when I opened issue 2, the first page, it says previously.
And Nat, this isn't your first time seeing a previously page, right?
Well,
in
yeah,
Daredevil,
like
you
in
saw
Daredevil,
it,
there was
yeah.
the origin story, and I mean, those are again like tropes of the superhero genre.
And it's also, well, the previously on page is a recurring feature of serialized comics.
Right.
Because it's telling you, it's like, the soap opera last week on Days of Our Lives, right? And so it's normally pretty straightforward, to the point, quickly, let's get back into the action. But in Sex Criminals, issue 2 starts with a page of text, and Nat's going to read it to you.
I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically goes previously. Page 1 and 2 were pretty cool. There were a couple of attractive characters named John and Susie making out in a washroom, but there was also a mysterious person demanding they come out. And you can tell that person is weird because the lettering was all white on black, like how the Sandman talks. Hey, I got that reference, you know? Page 3 is like, what? And suddenly we see a guy fall to his death after killing the dad of our main character, Susie. She's a little girl and it's in the past, and the adult version is they're breaking the 4th wall and our concept of time by talking to us from this scene in the past. Weird. So it just goes on, and then it
actually cuts.
It cuts off halfway. It doesn't even finish. It gets to like page 14, and then it's just like.
And to be clear, it's when Nat says cut off, it's like cuts off like the top half of the words.
Yeah.
So it's not even a neat cut.
It's sort of like a Star Wars, like
Scrolling,
in a galaxy.
yes.
Yeah, far, whatever, long away.
Well, okay. I don't think that explained to the reader,
No,
the listener, what this book's about.
But I just made a mental note when I was reading that I have to bring that up in the recap. But here's my very, very succinct recap. We have the beginning that sort of opens on this cliffhanger of this couple having sex in the bathroom. But very soon we kind of go back to the story of the protagonist. Her name is Susie. And sort of her self-discovery of sex and masturbation and self-pleasure. And throughout the whole of episode 1, and I'm sure we're going to get to it, sort of the depiction of that orgasmic space is really interesting. And all up to the end of issue 1, I just sort of thought it was her having an orgasm, right? And I think that's the intention. Most readers just think that. But then we get to the end when she meets this guy and they have sex, and then they both kind of, well, I thought they both orgasm because they both entered that sort of like colorful space.
Yeah.
But then there's this moment when they're like, how did you get here? And
Yes.
then we realize as a reader that this orgasmic space is not just a depiction of the typical human orgasm. These two characters have the ability to do something in this space. Something different, something supernatural is happening.
Well, it's when they orgasm, they stop time.
Yeah, but we don't actually get to that in issue 1. Do we?
Yeah, it's kind of there.
Where?
It's kind of, so she'll pleasure herself, and then she'll walk into a room, and then she'll get there, and then somebody else will realize she's been there. Someone else will be like, oh, you were there?
Right.
So when she takes a bath, and then she pleasures herself, and then she goes into her living room, and then time resumes again, and her roommate is like, whoa, have you been there this whole time?
I wonder how much of that is you knowing that with pre-existing knowledge. Because I felt like reading that, like it wasn't super clear to me.
Okay, sure. I mean, I don't think we don't need to focus in on
that's
that
my
too
authentic
much.
reading experience.
Yeah.
You know? And maybe I'm dumb.
Wait, I think you are kind of dumb. Because there's this page here where the first time when she loses her virginity, it freezes on the man's face after she's done. And she lies there, and then she leaves and goes into the party.
Well, so
so you were reading that as poetic /
because my interpretation of this, and I mean, okay, we're jumping all over the place in this recap, I'm sorry, but my interpretation of that was because a device they use throughout the comic is the present day Susie is often inserted into the scene, narrating and talking, breaking the fourth wall,
I see.
talking to the reader about what's going on. And so I just kind of saw that as a moment where she's like,
occupying her past body.
in the scene. So that's kind of how I read it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wrong, but okay, let's talk about issue 2.
I mean, as someone going completely cold, right, with no, I feel like you can't remove that lens as you read it. But as someone going completely cold, shut up. As someone going in completely cold.
I mean, I was reading it cold at one point, man. I got it. Just saying.
Well,
let's talk about issue 2. Tell me what issue 2
in
is.
issue 2, it becomes crystal clear.
Okay.
Because we learn that this couple, when they orgasm, after they climax, they are able to freeze time.
Yes.
And everything around them freezes except the two of them. And we get into the backstory of the male character, John, and sort of how he discovered he could do this. And then we sort of, at the end of issue 2, we're brought back into that scene that was introduced in the start of issue 1, which was them doing some sort of bank heist.
Yes. So, it's Sex Criminals. Matt Fraction is kind of going a little crazy with it in terms of time. And this is a feature of a lot of his comic books, is you're sometimes unclear of which moment in time you're in. Are you in the present? Are you in the past? Are you in the future? So issue 1 jumps around a lot, right? We start in the future, and then we go back to the past.
Or the present, I guess.
We start in the present, and we go back to the past, and we work our way forward to another moment of the past. And then issue 2 starts from that moment of the past.
Yeah.
And then works its way forward, and then we go back to the present.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really like, as Doctor Who fans would say, timey-wimey stuff.
Timey-wimey.
But I think it makes it for like a very engaging read, because
it's a great read, yeah.
You're jumping around a lot, and I think what it's also doing is it's putting you into the subjective experience of the characters. Because Susie's explaining us her story as her the narrator, and then later in issue 2, John is explaining it to Susie.
Yeah.
Right? And it's just a fun little device of narration that I think builds sympathy for us to these characters and gets us engaged with their story. Right. And then issue 3 and pretty much the rest of the book, though I think it jumps around a little bit, is the two of them together.
And there's there's an important detail that I neglected to mention in my recap.
Yeah.
Which was that space, that time freezing space, that refractory period space. Susie calls it the quiet.
Yes.
But John, my man John, calls it Cum World.
Which is where Nat came back from. Just reminding readers and listeners, when we came back from the break, Nat said he came back from Cum World.
And I don't know if you heard, because I was reading in a separate room.
Oh, no, I don't like this at all. I don't like this at all.
No. No, what I was about to say is...
We've gone like 10 episodes without this moment. And now we are here.
No. Get your mind out the gutter. The comic book gutter. What I was about to say is, I don't know if you heard, but the only time that I actually laughed out loud as I read was when that revelation of Cum World came out. The way it was done was so funny.
Okay, let's talk about how it was done.
Okay, I'm going to jump to that part, okay? So it's in issue 2. Okay, there's no page numbers, so I'm sorry. But there's a part in issue 2.
They're in the quiet right now.
They're in the quiet. And so the dialogue kind of goes... Susie says, the quiet. I call it the quiet. What do you call it? And then John says, not that. And then the next panel it cuts back to a flashback of him standing in front as a little kid looking up at the giant sign of the adult store that he used to frequent called Cum World. And that's how they reveal that he calls it Cum World. I don't know why I found that so funny, but it just made me laugh.
Let's do the worst thing possible, which is analyze why a joke is funny. Because the expectation from here is that they're going to talk in dialogue.
Right.
But we never actually see John say the word Cum World.
Yeah.
We just see him looking at the sign, and then we have Susie's response being like, oh.
I would say it's quite filmic.
Yeah.
In the humor.
Yeah.
Like, it's so easy to imagine that happening in a film.
It's like kind of like a smash cut to and then come back, right?
And interestingly enough, like, if you asked me, obviously a layperson in the comic world, but who's just starting to understand it, like, you would think that it's a page turn moment. Right?
No.
But it is not. It's right there, but it still works. It still made me laugh. Like, Seeing that in my periphery didn't spoil the joke for me for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, let's dissect this more. Okay,
Yeah.
So when they're in the quiet / cum world, there is a coloring effect that they put over the pages.
Yes.
Right? There's this sort of wisping blue and pink tendrils that color the page and make the panels look very, like they glow, right? They're
Yeah.
almost fluorescent.
Yeah.
And the pink matches the sign of the pink cum world.
Yes.
Right? So you turn the page and it doesn't stand out to you as, oh, this is not part of the moment. You just
Right.
think, oh, okay, that's just more of the
When
tendrils
you see it in your periphery, yeah.
But when you get there, you're like, oh, wait, okay, that's a flashback and that's not a random tendril.
And it lands because of the setup.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
like seeing, like if I just looked at this 8-panel page from a distance, I can see the cum world, but it's not funny in and of itself.
No.
It's funny because of the panel that precedes it and what they're talking about. And so
This
I
sort
think
of
that
intimate
goes back.
conversation. Yeah.
That goes back to the comedic timing. I mean, timing is an interesting word, but the comedic setup, right? Yeah.
No, I think timing is a valid word. I think timing is because the 8-panel page is structured to have 8 moments as the reader's reading the page. The timing may be different in how long it takes you to read an 8-panel page or me to read an 8-panel page, but the artist and writer are intentionally putting an effort in timing how you're going to read the page. Also, you just flip back to a page that makes me laugh.
Ask Jeeves.
Ask Jeeves. At one point, so John is trying to figure out what's going on with his body. And so he goes to the library and he goes to the computer and he goes to, I don't know if people remember this, Ask Jeeves.
Oh, I use Ask Jeeves all the time.
Yeah, it was like Google, except you'd ask it a question, but it was the same thing as Google. But
Yeah.
we just think you're responding to this robot butler. And then instead of going to Ask Jeeves, John goes to Ask Jeeves.
And then
And
he
it's-
searches bonars with booby.
And Jeeves, importantly, is facing away from us with his pants tucked down a little bit.
He's mooning us.
So we can see a little bit of his ass.
You think that's a real website?
Why don't you check it right now?
Yeah. Give me a second.
Actually, no, wait, no. You go to a different room and check it and then come back.
And then let me know if you can hear me.
Oh, man, this sucks.
I want to, since you brought it up, I want to talk a bit about the way that they depict the quiet.
Okay.
Which is, you mentioned the pink tendrils, sort of the coloring. I could be wrong. Yeah, I probably am. But when I was reading it, I was like, this is the first time that I'm seeing such an overt digital effect. You know, because a lot of, I'm not 100% sure how a lot of the art is done for comics, like whether it's done on pen and paper versus like drawn digitally.
Mm-hmm.
This could be drawn digitally, I'm not sure. But that effect, because there's a lot of like lens flare.
It's an
sort
overlay.
of, yeah. It's very overtly a digital thing that struck me for some reason. I feel like we've not really seen that in any of the other comics that we've read.
No, I don't think we have. I mean, if you compare it to, say, Mignola's line work in Hellboy, which is so clearly pen and paper, right, and so physical and tangible, and this is the overlay of the quiet is exactly like you're saying. It's digital. It's a manipulation of the page after the page has been already drawn.
Exactly. So I mean, that stood out to me because if anything, I would expect to see something like this on like a webtoon, right? A digital medium. But the fact that this is on, and I am reading a physical print version of this comic, it just stood out to me as like, oh, that's something that's very distinctly modern that you wouldn't see in like a comic from the 90s or, you know, from even the noughties, right? Maybe. You shut up. The noughties is a valid and not wrong way to say.
Oh, I thought you were doing a bit. I didn't know that was. I really thought you were being a little cheeky.
A little naughty.
You saw me reading the comic and you were like, what can I get away with right now?
Defend me, listeners. Defend me.
Don't.
I am
Don't.
but a man reading comics and trying to learn.
So one of the recurring bits of narration from Susie in issue 1 is, I promise the jokes are coming.
Yes. In the start of issue 1.
At the start of issue 1. And then, because Susie kind of has a sad life and is going through the bits that make it sad. And every time she as the narrator, grown narrator, will appear in the child's vision of the world and be like, okay, hold on, sorry. The jokes are coming. I promise you.
And more than that, there was another line where she said, the sex is also coming. Yeah. Right? That was really funny to me because it's obviously acknowledging the genre of the work. And clearly that was at the forefront of the marketing, right? It's a very self-cognizant piece of writing.
And so I want to talk about kind of the emotion that's in issue 1.
Sure.
Right? Because it is actually a little heavy. It lands a little heavy sometimes.
Yeah.
One of those moments is when young Susie finds out that her father has passed away. Right? And it's a 4-panel setup. It's young Susie in her classroom, and old Susie tucked up behind her, in the seat behind her, and talking about finding out this information for the first time.
Yeah.
And then the middle of that page is this kind of almost like painterly image of just young Susie and old Susie in the classroom together.
Very different style from the rest of the comic.
Very different. It's not bordered in a hard line of a grid. It's washed in a different color. It's just this moment of solitude, of loneliness that I think is a big defining feature of the book, which is about loneliness, right? Because by the end of the book, she finds John. But throughout the book, she's convinced that she's going to be alone forever for a range of different reasons. And one of those being, her father's passing away. And the other one is the inability for her to understand what's happening to her body.
Yeah.
Despite multiple attempts trying to find out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the 3 strikes. You remember the 3 strikes?
Yes.
So before the 3 strikes happens, she tries and talks to other girls in her school to ask them what's going on. And one of them responds with, "Hey, slut." Right? And that panel itself gets cropped and used later. But when it's cropped and used later, the word bubble is cropped too.
Yeah.
And so it really just takes us back to that moment. I always find that so fascinating every time I reread this issue, how the word bubble is cropped. Because even the words aren't fully in view.
Yeah, you can only see a bit of the L, the UT. Yeah, and when I read that, I did flip back as well, just to confirm that it was the exact same panel cropped in. Yeah.
And it's just a fascinating thing. We're talking about how this book is funny, but it's also playing with memory in that way, right? How like something can crystallize for you and you just get the most pivotal moment of it, and that's what you remember. Let's go back to the 3 strikes.
Yes. So the first strike is when she goes back to talk to those who she calls the dirty girls. And she just straight up confronts them and was like, "I got something I want to ask you. You sluts." And then she's like, "What's up with orgasms? What happens when you touch yourself?" And then they're like, And then so that was strike 1, right? They couldn't give her an answer.
Yeah.
Then she has a very, very interesting conversation with a senior who she describes as the biggest hoe bag in Eastview Middle School history in a high school bathroom toilet, where this senior is like, "Look, I'm going to tell you everything I know about sex because I wish I had someone when I was your age to tell me about it, because if that was the case, I probably wouldn't have HPV and my dad wouldn't hate me." Which, honestly, very sad.
Again, right? So there's this comedy and then there's also sadness.
Yeah.
And I did kind of brought this up on accident, this whole relationship between tragedy and comedy.
The comedy is tragedy with
Plus
time.
Yeah, right? And so we're looking back on these moments and Susie's looking back on these moments and finding them funny.
Because they're in the past.
Because they're in the past.
Yeah.
But honestly, part of the reason I picked Sex Criminals at all was because I wanted Nat to describe to, using his words, the images he's looking at on these 2 pages, which is when Susie is in the bathroom and the senior is explaining to her a bunch of sex positions using a Sharpie and drawing on the wall.
On this podcast, I learn a lot of things. Usually, mostly about comics. But today, I learned a lot about sex positions. Positions that I didn't know existed.
I don't think anybody knows these exist.
And to be honest, probably will never try. Let me take you through some of them. Some of my personal favorites. There's one called shrimping. And the 2 bodies form a circle. And the female places her index finger in the man's butt. While his back is arched, she holds his ankles. If you could picture with me, let's move on.
Listener, I'm going to save this. You don't have to picture anything with him.
Now,
I'm going to give you that
There's another one that I really enjoy called the user agreement, which involves the woman sitting. And again, actually, this doesn't have to be a heterosexual couple. This could easily be done by, a couple of any orientation and of any gender. But so one person sits on a chair and the other person is on all 4s in front of them, kind of like a coffee table.
Yep.
And then the person on the chair, it's very important. This is a very important part. You have to put a laptop.
Yes, this is huge.
It's huge. You got to put a laptop on the back of the person.
Yep.
And then the person sitting on the chair uses their feet to give. And this one, it could, again,
That's enough. That's enough.
So that's the user agreement. Do you want me to go to one more?
Yeah, let's pick one more. One
more. I'll pick brimping. Because young Susie says, actually, that one could be kind of awesome. So, I have to mention that one if she thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
Potentially awesome. Brimping basically involves, this one of the parties must have long hair.
Yeah.
If you have short hair, this would be pretty tricky. So the person with long hair should be in front, probably sitting down on their knees. For some reason, the hands are over their breasts. I don't know if that's important or not. But then the person standing up will stand behind them and stick their member through the person's hair that's being pulled up by their hands. The amount of friction that can be developed through this position is questionable. But, hey, it's worth a try. Let us know what you think. Send us your reviews of these positions at comicsans@andasproductions.com.
That's comicsans@andasproductions.com.
Now he gets it right. Now he gets it right. Preferably with photos.
No photos. That's
where you draw the line.
That's where I draw the line. Fun fact about those pages is that Matt Fraction basically came up with this list of nonsense and then sent it to Chip and was like, okay,
nice.
You come up.
That kind of explains why the terms, okay, so except for like user agreement, the terms don't really link to the drawings. There's no connection.
Brimping, man. I'm sorry to everyone. I'm sorry to everyone that I brought us through this fun journey, but I'm glad, none of you have to be in the room with him while he's describing
room where it happens, the room. Okay, that's strike 2. And then strike 3, this one's sad. This one, very, very sad. We talked about the dad's death.
Yes.
And I think part of the whole emotional arc of this story is also the aftermath of the death.
Yes.
Which is the mom's, both of them, they're grieving. I think there was a line very early on in issue 1, she's talking about her mom and her mom crying. And then she says, we both gave each other a lot of space in those days. And then the next thing you knew, space was all we had. And I think it speaks a lot about that, to that loneliness, the aftermath of grief and dealing with that. And so strike 3 happens when she goes to her mom and she says, hey, I have a few questions about sex. And the mom says, great, now I'm raising a whore, as she drinks a glass of alcohol. And I think, yeah, that's sad.
It's really sad.
And then older Susie, again, who's sort of superimposed into this panel, is standing there with the younger version of herself and she says, strike 3.
And I think that relationship between young Susie and old Susie goes back to this statement I was trying to make during the Yant about how Sex Criminals is for the child in us. Right? And how much of this book is about reconciling and looking back at that past version of yourself and saying, hey, it's okay that you didn't understand what was going on. In a way that these characters did not get.
Yeah.
Right? Because, so that's Susie's side of it. John's side of it is he gets thrown into the more male-oriented view of sexuality, which is unrepentant bombardment of pornography. That's the only way he can understand his body because that's the way he's told to. And so we've talked about Cumworld, but we haven't talked about his time in Cumworld, right? Which is where he would go in, use the booth to watch a film, do the deed, and then just run around the store.
Yeah. I mean, before we get into that, sorry, I just want to go back to this, what you're talking about this journey of discovery, right, that both characters go to. Obviously, I can't relate as much to maybe Susie's journey, but John's story is one that many men like you and I might have, have similar experience. And as I was reading it, literally, my thoughts were like, damn, this is so relatable. I'm not the only one who freezes time when in the refractory period.
Same.
And like all this time, bro, I thought I was the only one. No, I'm kidding. But, I mean, in this one summer episode, we talked about this. We alluded to this, right?
Yeah.
This idea of as a prepubescent teenager with access to the internet, with access to Ask Jeeves, right?
Ask Jeeves.
You are going on this journey pretty much alone, right? And I did. I don't know about you, but I went on that journey alone. It was very confusing. I had nobody to ask questions to. My parents were not ready to answer those questions. So the internet was my only source, and that's a terrible source of any information in general, let alone sex. Yeah, and I don't know if you're going to bring this up later, but as I was reading it, I also realized at the back of the comic,
there's the letters.
Not in issue 1, sorry.
From issue 2 and issue 3 onwards, yeah.
There are this compilation of fan letters and then replies from the authors, and I've just skimmed through them, and so much of it is saying what I'm saying right now.
Yeah.
Is people going, holy shit, thank you for making this. This speaks so much to my personal experience.
Yeah, so the letter section is also a common feature of the serialized comic that Nat hasn't gotten to see before, because I think the only floppy you've read, Chubby Hardy, was Daredevil issue 1, right?
Yeah.
And you send in the letters after issue 1's come out. You can't respond to an issue that doesn't exist.
And normally the trades, I've read some trades and omnibuses, those don't.
The trades and the omnibuses don't have them. That's part of the joy of the floppy also, is that it creates this sense of community with people. I've sent in letters before.
Have they been published?
No, they haven't been published.
Oh, man. Hey, if any comic book writers are listening to this, publish one of Yant's letters. Come on.
I mean, this is sidetrack, but there's often times where like people will dredge up and find like, oh, Chris Claremont or Alan Moore or Grant Morrison wrote in this letter to this comic in the 70s.
Right.
When they were like children.
And it wasn't published.
And it was published.
Oh, it was.
And then people are like, oh my God, you can see their sensibilities translated to the comics they would later make.
Right.
Going back to John's journey, and in relation to Cumworld or his time in Cumworld, metaphorical or physical. There's this really funny moment that I'm actually realizing now, only in recording this episode, when the first time he discovers it is when he masturbates for the first time, right? And he doesn't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so something, shoots into the air and time freezes.
Right.
And so his seminal fluid is floating in the air around him.
Oh, I missed that.
And the thing that I want to, well, that's not even just the thing I want to talk about, which is that the jizz, to use the scientific term, mirrors the tendrils of the quiet.
Right.
Right? So it's kind of explaining a little bit of what these lines are.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear.
Well, not literally what the lines are, but giving us the shape and the figure of what we're looking at.
Speaking of Cumworld and John's experience, I think one thing we've also neglected to mention is that he has a glowing dick.
He does.
That's insane.
I have nothing to add to that.
I thought I was the only one.
Okay, now let's move into the special section from issue 3.
Yes.
So we've already had a lot of moments where Matt Fraction and Chip Zdarsky are kind of winking at us.
Yes.
But this is the moment for me when kind of Sex Criminals kind of came together and made me really laugh.
I mean, I think this is the comic that, out of all the comics we've read, this one breaks the fourth wall the most.
And let's talk about this spectacular fourth wall breaking section.
Yes.
What's happening in this scene, Nat?
So in these 4 pages of issue 3, which again, unfortunately, we realize there's no page numbers.
No.
So I can't tell you what page it is. But if you read the whole of issue 3, you will see it and you will know it. But in this scene, they're playing billiards, pools, whatever. It doesn't matter what they're talking about, because what happens is a song comes on and Susie's like, oh, I love this song, right? It's my jam. And then she begins to start singing the song, or so it's implied, because then over her speech bubbles, which presumably would have the lyrics,
Yes.
Fraction and Zdarsky superimpose this sort of, I would say it's almost like post-it like.
Yeah, they look like memo pads. Like
Yeah.
they don't even look like normal narration or speech bubbles. It's really, we're talking to you right now.
And they obscure all the speech bubbles so you can't see the lyrics, and they're basically explaining how they wanted to use this Queen song, but they couldn't get the rights in time. And they're like, wow, but wouldn't it be awesome if this was the Queen song? Maybe we'll get the rights in time for the trade. But for now, it's really funny.
And I think it's extremely funny because it's also the moment when, so that's happening and the story's still going on because there's a narration from John who's saying, in case you were wondering, babe. And then it's a panel of Susie singing with no lyrics, with just notes from Chip and Matt. And Fat Bottom Girls was when I knew I loved you. So it's actually like a really emotional moment that is being punctuated by this nonsense from these guys. And so the top of the 3rd page is 4 panels of Susie singing with different lighting, different poses. And she's singing the lyrics and the captions go, anyway, so, next panel. Freddie Mercury, huh? Next panel. Best pipes ever. Next line. It would have been fun. Ah, well.
And I'll be honest, because of the way that they colored this scene and like all the lights in this club or whatever, in this pool parlor, for a second I was like, are they in Cumworld right now?
Nope. They're just enjoying Freddie Mercury.
Yeah. But I'm sure that the coloring was intentional in some way.
Yeah.
Sort of signaling that euphoria that she's experiencing right now. Almost orgasmic, right? Eargasmic, if you will.
I'm going to read you a little bit of an interview from Fraction and Zdarsky, okay?
Sure.
So this is the interviewer. Another big moment in the book is when you break the 4th wall for Queen's Fat Bottom Girl sequence. Is it true that you were really trying to get the rights for that? Fraction. Yeah, we tried very hard. Zdarsky. We had 2 sets of lawyers on it.
Wow.
Fraction. That page was the last one to go to the printer. There are photos for the page. There's a layer in Photoshop that has the lyrics, and there's a layer that has the notes. It was a matter of turning one on or turning the other off before we uploaded. We kept it down to the last minute to let the lawyers do their thing. Zdarsky. It filled me with joy knowing the lyrics are technically there on the page.
Nice.
In that file, the lyrics are there. They're just technically covered up. Fraction. That was not a joke. That was all very legit. Zdarsky. The last thing we heard was that issue 3 of the comic ended up on Queen guitarist Brian May's desk.
Nice. And this, they actually mentioned that, which is here it says, we even had to send in script pages and everything. Just think, Brian May might have read this page before you did. Crazy, right?
And I think that's, we can talk about comedy and how to write comedy, but I think that sequence in particular, why I want you to read that, is because it's just about having fun sometimes. Like if you're having fun with your collaborator, that's contagious. And that's how I feel about Sex Criminals. I feel like it's an infectious sort of fun.
Yeah.
Even though it's sad sometimes, it's still, and that's infectious too, right? But it can make you laugh, it can make you feel, and I think it's because of this collaboration between these two, where they're just kind of pushing each other. They're egging each other on.
Yeah. Did you almost say edging?
I did almost say edging.
Nice.
That was a Freudian slip. But like brimping became a thing because not really like a thing.
Because I've not seen that in the stuff that never mind.
It became a term. It became a subject because all Matt Fraction was doing is like, I'm gonna push you. I'm gonna find a point where you can't go.
Right.
To Chip and being like, you find it out. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's so much fun, and to do that in a way that's also very, I would say, liberating.
Yeah.
Right. I think Sex Criminals, it's very fun, but I think it's also liberating in that it's demystifying how we view sex.
Yeah.
Right? It's trying to unpack those taboos, and it's doing it in this wild and zany way with a bank heist, with science fiction elements, with, floating jizz.
Which makes me actually kind of upset now that it's being requested to be banned.
Once again, we are on the side of the banned books at Comic Sans. We always side with the banned books.
Even this one summer, I mean, I obviously do not agree that it should be banned, but like I can understand that perspective a little bit because of the children aspect.
Sure.
Right? Again, don't agree, but whatever. This one is clearly for adults.
Yes.
I don't understand. It's baffling to me.
Well, I think it just comes back to this conversation about how comic books are seen as they're for kids. And so the idea that there can even be an adults-only comic is an oxymoron.
Interesting. Okay.
So therefore, because it's a comic, a kid's going to pick it up and think, they can read it because it's for me. And then they're going to see Cumworld.
but hey, newsflash, they probably already saw their own version of Cumworld. Like, that's the whole point. I mean, what I'm saying is that the point of this book is like, you're not protecting them from anything.
No, you're not.
You're not protecting them from anything.
They're getting there anyway, and you've got to guide them.
They've seen far worse. They have seen far worse.
Coming from two non-parents.
Coming from two boys who were once younger boys. I think that alone is the prerequisite experience required.
Everyone, this has been Sex Criminals. And so, Nat, I've got 2 questions for you.
Yeah.
First question, would you keep reading?
I think so.
Nice.
I really enjoyed the experience of reading the floppies of this one. And the thing is, I know there's no way I'm going to get my hands on the floppies. You're not going to give me your copies, and I'm not going to buy them. So,
well, if you be careful with them, I'll let you do them, and you don't read them in a room with a closed door.
I mean, as long as you don't hear me.
Man. Another, now that Nat's brought up the floppies, there is one more thing I wanted to bring up, which is at the back of, I think, issue 1. No.
If a man comes and no one hears him, did he really come?
Yes. Yes, he did. That's not a philosophical question. That's not something for debate. There's a poster for a launch party for Sex Criminals.
I saw this.
Yeah.
It was so funny. Okay, yes.
On September 23rd, I'm reading the page now. On September 25th, the Sex Criminals #1 release party was held at Wicked, a sex club in Toronto. Chip dressed as erotic stories while Matt had his nipple pierced on stage.
Why did you say erotic stories and not Garfield?
What? Where do you see Garfield?
Chip dressed as Garfield and read erotic stories. How did he dress
Freudian
as
slip, Freudian slip.
He just skipped the line. Yen skipped the line.
There's nothing more erotic than Garfield.
For context, listener, Yen's mortal enemy
I hate Garfield.
Is Garfield. And you saw it right there. He just literally omitted Garfield from his reading.
I really hate Garfield. We're never going to read Garfield for Comic Sans.
We'll get more into this law in another episode. But back to the question. Yeah, I can totally see myself reading this. It was a very relatable, very resonant work for me.
And my second question, and let's see if I get it right. Okay?
Yeah.
If you like X, you would like Sex Criminals.
You got it right, but again, not a question. But that's not your fault. That's just sort of our producer's fault.
And X equals...
Question mark.
Question mark? X equals?
The first thing that comes to mind, again, I don't know if this is the best linkage, but the first thing that comes to mind, just because we were talking about breaking the fourth wall, is Deadpool. Specifically, I'm talking about the films. I've never read the comics. I don't know if that's a feature of the comics.
Oh, it's a huge feature of the comics.
Yeah. But in the films, Ryan Reynolds breaks the fourth wall so much, and that's a huge part of the humor. I found it hilarious, especially in the first Deadpool, when that was sort of so novel, right? So I think if you like that sort of humor, just because breaking the fourth wall is such a big part of the comedic devices used in this, I would say that's a potential affinity you might have with this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I would say, and this is maybe a little bit tenuous because I haven't watched later seasons and I heard they're not as good, but I would say the first season of Big Mouth.
Ooh, which actually, I have watched that.
Which has a lot of tonal resonance with Sex Criminals.
Yes.
Because it is about kids, but it's clearly written by adults from an adult perspective about their teenage/childhood.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I would say season 1 especially when I think it's a little more heartfelt, it's a little more grounded before the other monsters come into play.
Yeah.
And now the
second half of our pipeline, which, I realized up to this point, we've never actually explicitly articulated that this second half, even though it has always been the case up to this point.
Yeah.
But let me now explicitly articulate that the second half of this pipeline is another comic, right? So we start broad, right? If you like this movie, if you like this song, if you like this brand of clothing, right? Then you might like this comic book. And if you read this comic book, here are more comics that Yen is going to recommend that are along this pipeline.
Right.
Was that not clear to you before?
No.
Because, surprisingly, up to this point, as the one editing, you've always recommended comics in the second half of the pipeline.
Yeah. Wow.
But now it's making more sense.
The more you learn. Now I'm starting to understand how this show works a little.
So what is your comic? What's the next comic in this pipeline?
Oh, man. I think there's a lot of really funny comics. Actually, I'm going to go with my gut because actually when we were picking this episode, I was deciding between two because I knew I wanted you to read a funny comic. I couldn't decide between Sex Criminals and my other one that I really enjoy, which is The Fix by Nick Spencer and Steve Leiber. And The Fix is also a buddy cop thing. They're not fornicating with each other though.
Oh, man.
But it's just about these two corrupt cops in LA.
So this is about criminals and that one's about law enforcement.
Well, they're not really. I think that book is a riot. I think it's got so many great jokes in it. It's also very adult-oriented, I would say. There's a lot of jokes about sex and things that I wouldn't hand The Fix to a child.
Right.
Yeah. But that's my recommendation. The Fix by Nick Spencer and Steve Leiber.
Very nice. So check that out, folks. If anyone ever completes any of these pipelines, let us know.
Drop us an email.
I won't say it again.
I won't even try. Nat, do you want to tell them why we're in New York?
Oh, yeah. Before we go, let's just give a quick shout out to ourselves. Because the reason why we are in New York, listener, if you listen this far, you deserve this information. And it also means you probably care about us enough. Yen and I
won't assume that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yen and I, outside of doing this podcast, we also have our own careers as writers. And so we are currently writing a musical.
That is correct.
And we were very fortunate to receive some funding to come to New York and have a little writing retreat, which is why we are here in this apartment. If you watch the video clips, you will see this is a different space that you've ever seen before. And if you're interested at all to follow us on this journey, this other part of our lives, you can follow us on Instagram and also TikTok, but that one's I'm still figuring it out. At Badal Must Fall Musical, which is at BATAL Must Fall Musical, all one word. So
on Instagram
and TikTok, but still figuring it out.
He's still figuring out TikTok. Folks. He's still figuring it out.
Other than that, please remember to like this show on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on wherever you get your podcasts.
Google Podcasts, soon to be defunct Google Podcasts.
Oh damn. Yeah. Also rate the show, follow the show. Did I say like at the start? That's not a thing. Follow the show. Rate the show.
Yes.
Give us a review. Let us know what you think. It really, really helps us a lot. Boosts us in the algorithm.
Recommend us to your friends offline as well. Not everything has to be done online, Nat.
Yeah. Disconnect.
That's
the connection to our musical.
Anyway, thanks everyone for listening. This has been Comic Sans. We'll see you on the next page.
See ya. Thanks for listening to Comic Sans. This is an Andas Productions podcast hosted by Myle and Nathaniel Ma and produced by Roshan Singh Sambhi and Scott Lee Chua. Our cover art is by Isabel Fang. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and rate Comic Sans. And while you're at it, follow us on social media at Comic Sans Pod. Links are in the description below.